What if the secret to staying driven to achieve your goals wasn't to tie it to your life's purpose like so many gurus suggest, but instead find an enemy to drive you, to channel the haters and doubters who said you'd never make it, the ones who stomped on your dreams? In Choose Your Enemies Wisely, Patrick Bet-David, #1 Wall Street Journal bestselling author, the founder of Valuetainment, and host of the PBD Podcast, as well as author Greg Dinkin, show you how to use your enemies to drive your big dreams. Because as Patrick said, doing something big demands more than just desire. It requires the right enemy. Arden, what do you think of this concept of leveraging an enemy?
I think, it's like Patrick talks about in the book, it's rooted in emotion to kind of push you forward, but you can't only have emotion. There should be some logic that, guides you. But what I was wondering is this for everybody? Like, can everybody apply this concept at, different times in their life and what they're going through? Because it's such a, like, you want to go to battle, like choose your enemy. Like, I want to go to battle with this person and that person. And I know that, Robert Greene in his book, 33 Laws of War, I think, Strategies of War, his book, he gets into this too, but that's very much driven in war. And, here are some strategies of war that you can apply to business. And even in the book, Art of War, they talk about this concept of how to pick your enemies to help propel you. So I definitely do like the concept, and Patrick does a great job explaining it. I just was questioning, can everybody do this?
So I wonder too, because interesting as you reference those other books, because the concept, I haven't heard it articulated in this way that stuck with me, because it did resonate with me, because I think the alternative to it is this idea of, finding your purpose, discovering your why. Simon Sinek, popularized this and, as a framework where it's like, you want to do X in order to achieve, Y, but you often feel when creating those, or at least I've felt, maybe it's a pressure I created on myself or a fantasy, I created for myself, but that you need it to be something that's really like, not just like even about you alone, like it's somehow bringing some greatness to the world. And, or sometimes we might tie it back to, I'm going to do this for my family, which is, great. That's nice. There's nothing wrong. But sometimes for me, that didn't provide enough of that fuel. So this concept I really liked, and I knew you and I started debating on it over text a little bit, because there's a couple of things touched on in here. There's the idea of this, know thy enemy. There's the enemies, which are spelled out as, the doubters and the haters who doubted your abilities. And then there's the idea of the competitors, which are, the known entities as they're described that you, can objectively assess and kind of compare yourself to. And I personally look at both of those and understand both of those as being able to be enemies in this way, that if you're playing a sport and you're competing against somebody, that other team is, at least in my mind, the enemy. When you play, because you play basketball a lot better and a lot more than I do you see the other team as the enemy at that time, or do you just see it playing with, friends?
I think when you're just playing pickup ball with friends, it's not as much as a enemy. It's more like in that moment, you want to win. Like, you want to be the winner, because you don't want to be the shit talking on the wrong side of it. You want to be on the right side of the shit talking. But when it came to competition basketball, and it wasn't against friends, yeah, we went in there and it'd be like, we want to crush you guys. And it was finding, and the coaches would do a great job on it, finding those things to get you fired up and get that feeling in your belly that says, just you're ready to just destroy them. Now, did it always happen? No, just like how, great athletes don't win every game, but you increase your chances by focusing on who do you want to beat instead of being vague about it. So in sports, this concept works brilliantly.
So then with that, that's why for me, it's like, thinking about how this then transfers and you apply it to other places, because unconsciously, if you think about some things that people do, I think when they're, call it younger, we'll call it that first love or whatever it is. And who knows, maybe I'm giving a peek into my own world and people are going to be like, you got problems, dude. But like, where that ex, for whatever reason, you're like, I'll show you. And I think a lot of people have this thing that might drive them. Or another one might be, it could be your parents. Oh, my mom or dad don't believe I could do this. Or it could be the opposite. You're defending your parents and you're like, they've done, like what you want to do then is you pick some other enemy. Patrick speaks about that in the book about how he did that. But like you pick this other enemy who drives you. But so I think it actually can work outside of sports. And I see it in business, I think a lot too, where somebody may determine either somebody says you won't be able to do that. And they'll be like, I will prove you wrong. Or the competitor side of it, where they're actually like, this is a competitor. We want to beat him. You better believe Pepsi and Coke weren't just in there being like, good old, Pepsi over there, Coke over there, just doing their thing. The CEOs, I think, are at war. So within companies, you have CEOs who are, in essence, at war because they don't want to just be the third or fourth or fifth or sixth company. They're all fighting for the top. And that ultimately means more market share. And so I do think that it can and should translate there, but I think along the ways, again, we all look for this thing that feels much more, I don't know, like feeding hundreds and thousands of people sure sounds like we're a better person than saying we are going to kick so-and-so's butt. But for you, competitors, do you think about competitors that way? Like for me, I'll admit, when I was looking at landing promotions and stuff, I did see certain individuals who were my competitors for that promotion. And that drove me in some ways to be better than those individuals. Do you ever look at it like that?
Oh, for sure I do. But I always have to check my ego sometimes too, to make sure that it's not ego driving that. It's not falling into the trap of comparing myself to the Joneses all the time, because there's always be bigger Joneses than me. So I check myself because I know ego come into play. But when it comes to like something bigger, I think if you could find that enemy to drive you, it would work 100%. It's just a matter of how do you get there, and would everybody have so many different personalities? Does this apply universally? Or as Patrick says it, it's for the audacious few. And does that mean it's for people that are super competitive, that are constantly looking for, I'm going to do better than this person, or, you did me wrong, so I'm going to prove you wrong. Like that constant chip on your shoulder. Is that who this is the best for? I don't have the answer, but it's just, it's if you could have a chip on your shoulder at all times, for sure, you're going to, drive yourself to madness in a good way. But can everybody have a chip on their shoulder all the time if you don't have that competitive spirit in you?
And that might be it. That competitive spirit may be a big driver of it. And going back to your personality types, it's those who, some might prefer to make love, not war, and so I do think that's a driver. I would be very curious, if somebody did this study that literally broke down so many people who have reached, whatever level of success we want to say it is that most people would like, which doesn't mean the billionaire status. Often I think most people would like millionaire, but there are plenty who are like, I don't want anything. I just want to give it back to others, and they can be successful too. But I'd be very curious if some of them did have a chip, and that's ultimately what, drove it, but that we don't speak about that chip much because, again, I think society in a way has said, no, don't speak about that. Speak about the good you're bringing to the world, not the bitter thing. In fact, we go to psychiatrists to help us forgive those of our past when maybe we should actually be driving those individuals. I'm curious here, and you could explain a lot more than me because I'm sure I'll butcher the story, but there's an example in the book from Tom Brady, which is a great example of somebody who's really channeled this. Would you kind of break through your recollected knowledge in general of him, of how he leveraged it?
Yeah, I mean, I won't bore non-football fans here, but Brady was selected on the 6th round of the NFL draft. And to back it up, Tom Brady right now is considered the greatest quarterback in history, having won 7 Super Bowls. Right now Patrick Mahomes is being talked about. Can he be better than Tom Brady? But even though what Tom Brady achieved, he was actually picked in the 6th round of the NFL draft, the last round. And when he started, he was not even the starting quarterback. Drew Bledsoe was the starting quarterback. And it wasn't until Drew Bledsoe got injured that Tom Brady got his chance. So you could see that the chip on his shoulder was, you guys selected me in the 6th round, and I was not the starting QB. So I'm sure he picked Drew Bledsoe and the recruiting staff and coaches as his enemy, saying, I'm going to prove you guys wrong, which he did. Within the first 6 or 7 years, he won 3 Super Bowls. And then there was this period of success, but not Super Bowl success. And I'm sure he had everybody doubting him, like, that was a fluke. Just, you were young. And he proved them wrong. And then when he was, 40, however old he was, 40, 41, now it's like, you're too old, Tom. You're an old hag now. New England has no place for you. Now it was like, oh yeah, I'll prove you wrong too. So he goes to Florida with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and wins the Super Bowl there to prove everybody wrong. So you could see how throughout his career, he constantly was able to be in a position to prove somebody wrong, which you could say that's a chip on his shoulder, or for Patrick Concepts was he had an enemy that he selected wisely to help drive his motivation.
And to me, this is what's so interesting about the concept too, because if there was actually a way, and if people understood that and thought about how to channel that, then might it actually be better for some who otherwise instead believe what others might say and find themselves, I don't know, it's fair to say that's a state of depression, but they may find themselves doubting themselves a lot more. And I think a lot when you look at individuals, and this could be the difference again between personality types, but there are some people who, when people tell them things, instead of being like, I will show you, they instead internalize that. And for some people, it could go as far as suicide and other things. Like when you hear the stories about that, about people just, feeling so put down and unloved, lack of a better way to put it. I do wonder there if that's actually a benefit of training and thinking in this sort of way of where, no, when these things come your way, actually channel it, because, you will be able to prove, you will be able to show. But again, what I don't know, and this is where maybe we need the psychologists on here or a few different people to debate, is whether or not, no, that really does come down to personality. But I like to think that if we were raised in a way that actually thought about how we could channel that, it actually might be positive. And I'll say for me, that's one thing I'll try with my own kids, is think about it. Okay, well, that bothered you. Okay, well, instead of thinking you need to take revenge in the sense of going back and doing whatever you need to that individual, no. Your revenge is that game that's going to be more important longer term. I say more important, subjective, but use that, channel it. But it doesn't actually ever mean you even have to go back to that person and say, look, I showed you. You don't have to. What you do ends up speaking for itself. And I think that's the other reason why I like this concept, because even with competitors, the competitor, for me now, as I prepare to launch my program and course, help people in the career space, it's like there are others who do it. Well, in some ways, for me, the way I see those is my enemy. And you and I were debating this too, because you're like, but are they? I'm like, they are. I look at them as, I want to win. I want to compete. I'm not trying to take revenge per se on them, but I want to beat and want to be better than, because I'm entering this to be able to make sure I can not, just come into the game and not help very many people. I want to help a lot of people. But right there, you hear I'm also blurring the two, because I also have a goal to want to do good in this world. So I wonder if it's channeling the two of these together that actually can unlock the most.
Yeah. So, let me give you an example. Curious your thoughts. So, Will Smith's character in Pursuit of Happiness, he basically lost everything from what I remember, and he had his back against the wall. Like, if he didn't take massive action, his family would not have a place to eat. So in that scenario, when somebody has their backs against the wall, are they choosing an enemy, or are they now saying, I need to do everything possible for my family? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say initially, based on what I hear there, and I admit I should see this movie again to see and understand more of his backstory and psychology. But that feels like doing more for the family. But I also do wonder what that driver like is for him. Like if there was more to it. That's the thing I don't know about that. But yeah, I mean, that definitely feels more family driven. I mean, I think in the end, we as humans, for lack of a better way to put it, are programmed to the most important thing in the world to each of us is ourselves. But our family is part of our identity of ourselves. So in that scenario, when you feel backed up, it almost does become about survival and survival for all. And when you look at Maslow's hierarchy, ultimately the first thing you have to do is the survival. So I could see how that one is like the key thing. Fortunately, we don't have to fight the saber-tooth tigers and the other cave men of the or women of the past. That I don't think it gets quite to that point where you have the enemy. But I would argue and say it might just be because you're still struggling for that piece. But at the same time, I think somebody else out there, again, referencing just Patrick's story, he mentions that a big driver for him to achieve the success he had was when he had overheard some individuals speaking poorly of his dad, who was very successful before he came over to the U.S., and he did not like that. And that was a big driver for him. So in that scenario, if he was, Will Smith, in Pursuit of Happiness, it might have been family, but it was also heavily driven because he's like, no, I'm going to show, and you are my enemy, and you will see it one day. So I don't think it's as clear cut, but I do think you could take Maslow's hierarchy probably and argue and say at first we do need survival is it, caring for our family is it. That's an instinctual thing that's really hard to fight.
Yeah. And, that's a great point. And it might be that in order to be in a position to choose your enemy, one, you have to be in the game that you want to be at already, and out of survival mode. Then you actually are able to do what Patrick says.
Yeah, it's funny. In some ways, I'm like, yeah, that might be right. But then at the same time, if you truly think about it and you go even back further, this isn't what necessarily maybe Patrick had in mind, but I'm diving deep here. Well, back long ago, part of that Maslow hierarchy of survival was making sure that you knew who your enemies were. And again, they might have been saber-tooth tigers or whatever else. So actually, in that case, that was the first thing, because to survive, you needed to know your enemies. So maybe that's actually another argument here that is why when you can channel that, it can be so powerful, because we historically had these enemies, and because we don't today, what do we do instead? Our enemy often becomes ourself, in our own self-doubt, in our own fears. So maybe we're channeling the wrong enemy because we're not focusing on another enemy. So I don't know. I hadn't thought about it until now, but
how would you say someone should go about picking an enemy? I mean, is there a criteria? I mean, Patrick talks about it, but I'm just curious what you think.
Yeah. Well, when it's a competitor, I think that's one thing, which again, I don't know if Patrick was hearing that argument, say, I think competitors and enemies are slightly different, but I do think that the lines, blur there. But I think that, you first have to define what it is where it is, what success might look like, to you. And again, whether that goes back to using a Simon Sinek model of a why, I don't know, and then backing it up with, that enemy. But I would say that, thinking deep about those things, if you start journaling and saying, what are these things? Why are you even driven to do something? And hone into that a lot more so that you can really focus on it and say why. I mean, you did something actually this year that I thought was interesting with your goals that did kind of channel into that. I don't know if you wanted to share your model, which is different than, say, my model, which is looking more into the future, backing out, and then saying, what do I have to achieve now to get that done, which now I'm attaching an enemy to. But you kind of went with the enemy first. So I'm curious for you to share that.
Yeah, I mean, I won't get into the details of it, but you and I were kind of both goal setting a month or so ago at an individual level, but also tied to kind of the podcast and everything else that we want to achieve in 2024. So when I sat down and tried to come up with, okay, here are the things I want to do, I started to think about the why. First I was thinking about the why am I doing this? It sounded good on paper, but I didn't feel that fire in my stomach. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. It sounds good. Why am I not getting emotional about it? As soon as I got to the why, that was, I know why. I'm going to prove these people wrong. As soon as I got to that, that's when I felt it. I'm like, that's it. If I'm feeling it, this is when I'm going to drive me. This was before I read Patrick's book. Like literally a week later, I read Patrick's book. I'm like, that's basically it. I kind of did the same thing in a slightly different way. But that's basically what Patrick is talking about. But obviously Patrick goes deep into it and how you have to constantly change it, because as you evolve, your enemy can become your friend once you beat them. So,
and I think that's a key, because actually for me, that's in some ways what I look forward to, because actually in some ways it probably means you overcame some of your own stuff. And who knows, again, a psychologist would be like, yeah, but that's only because now you felt you had to do that to be an equal. It's like, well, yes and no. Channeled it to be able to do that. But then once you're above that, now you can look at it and be like, okay, I forgive, or I don't think about it that anymore, because you have a new enemy. It could change. But when you did that approach, it was inspired, right, by a baseball player?
Yes. Well, the framework, not really Patrick, but I, Otani, who got this massive deal by the Dodgers recently. So he created a lot of buzz in the press, and it surfaced around how he had created his goals and what he wanted to achieve as a baseball player. And the framework was like, oh my God, I love this framework. And it was all in one kind of visual place, not a lot of detail, just, the center being kind of your core goal, and then how everything spuns out of that, the ripple effect, and how each one basically points back to the middle to support the main goal, your North Star goal, as I would say. So that's kind of how I did it. I just think it's a nice visual way, but it also allowed me to say, yep, this is why I'm doing it. And the why ended up being something that was emotional, and ironically ended up being saying, oh yeah, I'm going to prove these people wrong.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I liked it. And what was at the center of the baseball player?
He wanted to be drafted at number 1 in the Major League Baseball, which he did.
He did, yeah. And had he not, there's a really good chance that his driver would be proving everybody that he's, whatever it is. But, and actually in some cases, that could be that gift. Like Tom Brady, going back to it. Had he been in that initial one, who knows? Maybe he was the guy who channeled it anyway, and he would have found a way to channel it. But maybe that actually pushed him more and created the sort of thing of, feeling that drive. Patrick used an example in his book too, where, he mentions at the time, and again, I won't try to butcher the exact story, but he had somebody who was in essence a competitor in the space. But I say competitor, Patrick was new to the space, and the actual competitor themselves were far in front of him. But he went and he actually said to him, you watch, I'm going to beat you, and like literally made an enemy out of him, pissed the guy off in turn. But that created, again, even stronger enemy, because Patrick says he knew he needed that strong of an enemy to be able to achieve what he wanted to achieve. Because absent of that, again, it would have just felt passive. You wouldn't have the same thing that drives you, because it's a lot easier, or not easier. We're a lot more driven in life when we, there's a mixed story. Some people believe that when you tell people your goals, you're going to be more successful. Others say, no, actually you're less successful. I think if you tell somebody, or, that you're going to do it, like call it the competitor or whatever it is, and now that like there is actually this thing where it's going to be, I don't know, used against you, rubbed in your face, you're more motivated than if you tell your family and others, because they're going to be like, we don't care, we love you anyway. So one of them creates more of a, I got to stick with this than the other. So then as we move forward, and just some of the things actually too, I'll say the podcast. Well, our main, driver of the podcast wasn't necessarily, we'll show our enemies, but at the same time, it's like, it's easy to look at it and be like, oh yeah, there's definitely those managers of the past, or those individuals who, at the time, whatever it was in our careers, it's like we knew better, but maybe we couldn't, the politics, the other things, it was hard to do. But now, so in some cases now, it's like there's a little bit of that you could look at and that you could say, is beneficial and can drive. It's just like, aha, look, we've, growing a podcast and these sort of things, and we're helping other people with the stuff that was absent for us, which has both a purpose and can have a bit of a enemy. We obviously don't come on here all the time flipping, people off. It's not that, but it is a matter of trying to show that there is other ways, which to me is a little bit of a enemy mentality. Do you agree or disagree on that?
No, I totally agree. I think, as you said, we didn't start the podcast with the notion of, oh, we're going to prove people wrong. We started it because we thought it'll be just a fun creative outlet for us to talk about the things that we always talk about. But we're at a place that others might be interested in what we talk about. And that's still kind of up in the air, if that's true or not. But as we've gone a little bit of a momentum, and I think that's what probably goes back to in the beginning, it's this podcast was survivor mode. We're just trying to do it. Now that we're kind of past the survivor mode and we're seeing that, okay, this might actually grow into something bigger than this, that's where you start thinking about, okay, now who are we going to pick to beat and who are we going to prove wrong? So I think it definitely ties into the concept.
I agree. Now, if some way we butchered any of this concept, Patrick, you're welcome to come on and talk through any of this with us. Otherwise, we'd love to hear if anybody else did read the book, what they thought below. We only touched on, honestly, an early concept in the book. The book dives into business planning in a way that, Patrick has approached it. But we'd love to hear what anybody else thinks about that, and also whether or not you believe in choosing your enemies, or if you prefer following more of a purpose, or if you think that there is a strong thing and maybe you hear this and you're like, finally, somebody said what I have been doing and I don't feel like I'm some evil person because I have enemies in the world to channel. Arten, any parting words that you'd have?
Choose your enemies wisely. But we definitely want to hear from you. So drop your comments or send us an email to see what you guys think. This is such a fascinating topic. And don't forget to subscribe and like as well.
We'll see you later.